I'm Erin Bonney Casey. I'm the Executive Director of the Ipswich River Watershed Association. We also refer to ourselves as IRWA. IRWA is a community-based nonprofit organization, and our mission is to protect and restore the Ipswich River and its watershed now and for future generations. And for those of you who are maybe not intimately familiar with the Ipswich River watershed, it's an area of the North Shore. It goes from Burlington to Ipswich, and in the north goes all the way up to North Andover and down to Beverly, Danvers, Peabody. And that whole area is kind of the geographic area where all of the water in that area is hydrologically interconnected, ultimately drains into the Ipswich River, and then makes its way downstream to the Atlantic Ocean by Crane Beach. And so our organization works to essentially protect the environment across that hydrologically connected area, ultimately with an eye on the health of the rivers and water bodies on the North Shore. When we talk about Ipswich River water, from our perspective, it's all of the water within that geographic area within the Ipswich River watershed. And there are 350,000 people across the North Shore that rely on Ipswich River water for its drinking water. And that can be water directly from the river, it can be from wells within the watershed, or other surface water withdrawals, ponds and reservoirs within the Ipswich River watershed. When we're talking about Salem in particular, Salem gets all of its drinking water from the Ipswich River watershed through a series of reservoirs, and ultimately comes out of Wenham Lake, where our treatment plant is located. So what that means for Salem is that the quantity and quality of drinking water available for Salem is intimately tied to everything that's happening across the Ipswich River watershed as a whole. One of the challenges from our perspective, we're always looking at the impacts on river health. And one of the challenges for our river is that it is so intensively used. It's only about 40 miles long, and there are 350,000 people withdrawing water from the river. So that puts a lot of strain on the water available, both for people and for the ecosystem that relies on that water. One of the challenges with that water demand on the ecosystem is that our demand for water goes up exactly when the supply of water goes down. So namely in the summertime and also during drought conditions. And so there's a delicate balance that we're striking on the North Shore, making sure that we have enough water for people, but also leaving enough water in the environment so that the watershed and the river continues to function as it should. All right, so the impacts of climate change on the watershed are complex and varied. Essentially, what we're looking at with climate change is that we're getting more extreme weather kind of in every direction. And from a water perspective, that means more frequent and more extreme droughts, but also more frequent and more extreme flooding because we're seeing fewer but higher intensity rainfall events. So on the drought side, what that means is that in the past decade or so, it's every 2 to 3 years we're hitting drought conditions now, and so we're having to set up our systems to be much more resilient to be able to deal with water scarcity issues for people and for the environment. When the river experiences drought, the Ipswich River can go dry in stretches, and at that point the river stops functioning as a river and starts functioning like a series of ponds, which is really has a really negative impact on river health. On the flip side, when you're experiencing intense precipitation events and the flooding that associated with them, what we start to get concerned about is water quality. Most of the pollution in our region that we see showing up in our waterways is from stormwater runoff, which is to say, when it rains, whatever is on the ground, be that fertilizer or oils from cars on roads or road salt or pet waste, the rain is picking up those contaminants and then washing into the nearest water body, making its way into the river. And so we along with a lot of environmentally minded partners across the North Shore, as well as the cities and towns in this area, are looking at ways that we can mitigate the impacts of stormwater runoff and protect local water bodies, especially that serve as drinking water sources, from the contaminants that we see in stormwater runoff. Some of the solutions that we're pursuing around those water quality challenges are what are referred to as green infrastructure or nature-based solutions. And the idea around those is that we're working with nature to protect water bodies and clean potential contaminants out of that stormwater runoff before it makes its way into our ponds and rivers and streams. I would say on the drought side too, there are a lot of initiatives, policy initiatives at play in how we manage water resources during drought conditions. Right now, the state of Massachusetts really has a patchwork of regulatory standards for how water is managed during drought. It tends to be kind of town by town, but as we know, water doesn't react to town borders, and droughts are typically experienced across regions. And so we have been advocating for a statewide approach to drought management, which would apply water conservation measures across drought regions kind of uniformly based on the water availability at the time rather than the various permit conditions that we see currently that cities and towns have. So there's a regulatory solution to this. We're also promoting water conservation kind of writ large, and there are a few ways to think about water conservation. One is in individual behavior, so I challenge people to think about how are you using water in your homes, in your gardens, and on your lawns, and how can you reduce that usage, especially during, like I said, summertime and drought conditions, when there's less water available in the environment. How do we drive our demand down? There are also mechanisms that we can look at a town level where we're looking at how do we grow and develop and continue to add the needed housing, but maintain water demand at a constant level. And we refer to that idea as water neutral growth, which is the idea that the town continues to grow and we're achieving our development goals, but our water demand is staying the same. And in that way, we're kind of living within the resource constraints in terms of the water available to us. And I think there's a lot that we can talk about at a community level in terms of building codes and best practices across communities that can continue to drive down water demand. In terms of kind of how individuals can get involved in this work, I think there's a couple of ways I would say. One is for our organization, we do watershed-wide water quality monitoring. So we're sampling water across the Ipswich River Basin throughout the year and monitoring for emerging contaminants of concern to try and get ahead of problems. So volunteering with us to help with that water quality monitoring is a great way to get involved. I would also encourage people to really pay attention to the decisions that are being made at both your town or city and at the state level and to how that plays into water resource management. There are a lot of conversations happening right now within individual communities about how water is going to be managed, how we're investing in water-related infrastructure, and how we're, frankly, developing affordable housing, and how all that will impact the water resources in the environment in our community. That's a really important conversation to kind of stay aware of.